Hello, everyone. Welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are here again today to answer all your gardening questions and talk about what we're seeing out in the garden. My name is Candice Hart. I'm the Illinois State Master Gardener Specialist, and I live in Bloomington, so I'm kind of central Illinois located like my colleagues here. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
My name is Kelly Alsop, and I too live in Bloomington, and I am a horticulture educator that serves Livingston, McLean, and Woodford counties.
Awesome.
My specialty is insect identification and pest management.
Cool. And I'm Ryan Pancaw, horticulture educator in Champaign. And my specialty is trees and shrubs and woody things, like native plants, and I do a little bit of vegetable gardening, but not necessarily the expert there, but that's one of my fun hobbies. So
awesome, cool. Yeah. And I didn't mention my specialty is flowers, anything cut flower, annuals, perennials. That's kind of my jam. So we are here to answer all your gardening questions today. So if you have a question or comment, put it into the comment box, and we're going to address those today, while we also talk about some things that have been asked ahead of time and things that we're kind of thinking about. So Kelly, while we're waiting for questions, why don't you kick us off with what you've got?
Well, I wanted to talk about brown marmorated stink bug, big word, but these brown marmorated stink bugs are a home invader. So as the temperatures cool, they're going to start coming inside and trying to live in your home as a roommate, and they do not pay rent. But, so that tends to be the most of the time when we as horticulture educators get questions about this particular insect. Well, it is notorious on the East Coast, and it just like the populations have built up and built up and built up. So even though we have identified it here in Illinois, the populations haven't built up to damaging populations yet. So they could be a potential pest for tomatoes, for fruits, for apples. And what they do is they have this really long stylet, this piercing mouth part, where they stick it inside the fruit, and it kind of like rots all around it where they fed. So even though you're going to see them coming into the house, this could be a huge issue for organic fruit growers, or you yourself growing your fruit, your vegetables organically in the backyard. Well, there are traps. People use a lot of traps, especially in a vegetable growing situation. And in the East Coast, they use tons of traps to try to trap these, using a pheromone to get them inside the trap. And hopefully that's one of the ways of controlling them. I actually have found them on my tomatoes this year. They were just hanging out, mating.
Did they cause any damage?
They haven't caused any damage.
That's good.
They haven't caused any damage. But I know for the last 3 or 4 years, I've seen them come into my home, and I get lots of questions on that. So, you're just going to knock them into a vat of soapy water or vacuum them up, or however you address Asian lady beetles that come into your home. But they're not going to reproduce inside your house, and you're not going to have this huge population. So in the spring, they'll go ahead and leave. But they can be somewhat of a nuisance.
So it's mostly like soft-bodied fruits, as I understand
Softer
it,
things,
they go after.
Yeah.
Like your berries.
I had a question in email the other day. It was she had an Asian pear that had kind of a rippled skin to it, like a curvy skin. And when she cut it open, you could see kind of this brown areas right below the skin. And what we figured out, or what I told her, said it looks like stink bug damage is what it looked like the most. And they're fine to eat. You just have to kind of cut off that outside part, but you lose some of the fruit when you do that. So it's kind of a problem,
Is there like a particular identification trait?
Oh, yes.
That's a good point. Does it look like all the other stink?
It doesn't. One of the things that I've noticed, is I haven't noticed identification characteristics for the insect, is that it has little white stripes on its antenna. Sometimes it has white stripes on its legs, and stink bugs are hemiptera, which means half wing. So where the parchment-like part of the wing meets, it's kind of like black and white triangles. And then some stink bugs have these pointy shoulders where they just like jut out really bad. These are not going to have any point, a little point, but not a really big point. Smooth shoulders is one of them. And
the striped antenna, I kind of give it away for me. I was trying to think of the different
those
things.
bands on the
but
antenna. Yeah.
sometimes I notice that it doesn't always have that.
Oh, well,
Interesting.
so there's more things to add up.
I know.
Yeah. Well, and at this point, I mean, if whether it's a regular stink bug or a brown marmorated, in terms of coming into the house, we don't really care. I mean, either way, it's coming into the house, so you vacuum them up and you deal with them. It's more so like the fruit and vegetable production.
Well, yeah.
They're going to be more concerned about what kind it is, right?
Usually the regular stink bug is not going to come into your house.
Gotcha.
Because, that's not where they're, the regular stink bug has learned to overwinter in Illinois. This stink bug has not. It is
Needs a
looking
place
for
to
a
hide.
protected location.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
So they will be, everybody's going to notice them in their house, and you all will have them in your house. I know I've had it for
Oh, yeah. I've had the
4 or
past
5
couple years.
years,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've noticed them. Yeah.
but what we really care about is the populations building up to a point to where they become a pest for people growing fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, that's when it's kind of more of a concern.
And so that's inevitable, or, what's
I would say yes.
Well, and because it's happened in similar climates to ours. So, like, Pennsylvania, I know, has a real big population of these.
To where they've become this huge nuisance
Yeah.
and huge problem in organic fruit growing.
So if it can happen in a
situations.
similar zone to ours, then it's kind of
It's just a matter of time.
suspect it,
So I'm
eventually.
guessing they may be entered through the East Coast then? Is that, or do we know? Maybe we don't even
honestly,
know.
I don't know.
I've read it before, but I don't know offhand.
Yeah. Well, so
We'll see.
something
yeah.
to watch out for.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us, Kelly's been talking about brown marmorated stink bugs that we're going to see showing up in our houses this fall. If you have any gardening questions, anything, add it to the comment box, and we're going to address those today. But what else while we're waiting for questions, what else do we have this week?
Well, I had an interesting relationship to talk about that Kelly mentioned to me. That was actually really cool. And we were in the same place on Tuesday, and we were kind of talking about ideas of things to talk about. But the use of phenology is you use different indicators from plants during their life process to predict or do other things. So there's an interesting bit of phenology going on right now that you can use to control a number of different pests. So goldenrods bloom this time of year. We happen to have a goldenrod with us
Brought
right
one
here.
with today. So this one's obviously was in a greenhouse, so it's probably a little ahead of the goldenrod outside. But
There's some blooming
I've
right now.
noticed some,
Yeah, Canada goldenrod in Meadowbrook Park here in Urbana was just about to this point.
Yeah.
Earlier this week, I was out there with some of the master naturalists. So goldenrods, there's a number of them that are native. Solidago's the genus,
Yeah.
so we kind of say Solidago species when they bloom, which is right about now. The coming few weeks. There's a number of different pests we can control on our, in our yards and our landscapes. So spruce spider mites are one that. This is a point in their life cycle where they're vulnerable to some of the control measures we can take. They're there and actively feeding. So it's kind of something to remember. When goldenrods start to flower, it's time to look for spruce spider mite damage. How might you know if you have spruce spider mite damage? Well, there's signs on the needles. You can see if you have a really bad infestation. It's kind of I would call it a mottling on the needles, speckling.
Yeah.
A lot of times you have other spruce problems on the same plant, and this is just one of them that's kind of compounding other issues. But there's a really good test you can do for spruce spider mites, and it's just taking a sheet of paper and taking a spruce limb, and if you bang it on the sheet of paper, the little mites will fall off on your sheet of paper, and you can get just an idea of the relative amount of mites on that plant. They'll be crawling around in the paper, so you'll see them moving around.
Sure.
If you squish those mites, some of them will squish as green, and some of them will squish as an orange or red color. So that's important to understand because the green mites are feeding on chlorophyll in your plant. That's what you're seeing, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking our bug person.
They are.
So you're seeing chlorophyll, the green
sense.
pigment in leaves. The red are the predator mites. So they're
Right.
actually good guys.
Ah.
So if you have an even distribution of green and red, it's safe to say you have a lot of predator mites. If you only see the green, you don't have many of the predator mites. So how I've always advised people to look at this is if you have a lot of the predator mites, you may not need to do anything. They may control it well enough for you. If you have an unbalanced population where you have a lot more of the mites that are feeding on your blue spruce, it may be time to do some control. So what would you do for control? You could spray a miticide. There's a number of different miticides that are effective on this. If it's not a big tree or you can get your garden hose to it, you can actually spray with a heavy stream of water and knock them off. And I've really seen some pretty good results with that, but it's not something you just do once. It's like every day for a week, you need to go out there and hose off your tree. I found like some homeowners actually like that. It's kind of like watering a plant, or it's therapeutic in a way.
Yeah.
But kind of need to start from the top of the plant and move downward, which makes sense. You're kind of washing them down.
Yeah, and mites tend to prefer hot, dry weather, right? So that's when you tend to see those popping up. Or are these different?
The spruce spider mites are different.
They're different.
They're
Okay.
opposite. They actually thrive more in the cool weather, which is why
that makes sense. Then
we're
this time
seeing
of year.
there. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so
But the
Most
spider
of
mites.
spruce-
The spider mites we had to deal with in the greenhouse.
Yeah, that's what I'm more familiar with.
So yeah, that's kind of the story on one of those indicators. So when you see goldenrod blooming, check for spruce spider mites.
Cool.
Another one is fall webworm. Fall webworm is one that is pretty noticeable, honestly. At least for me. It's a caterpillar that's feeding on a lot of our deciduous trees. I mean, I don't know the species list, but it is long.
It is.
For what types of plants would have it. And they basically make a silken web that protects them from predators and other things. So you'll see that web just start to kind of grow, and they're inside it eating leaves. So you'll see, leaves browning up inside there. Really, it's usually not one that we treat for. It usually isn't that bad unless it's like right by your front door and is really something that just bugs you. It's not going to kill your tree, but you can oftentimes really knock them back by just breaking open the web, and birds will naturally come in and eat them, and other predators. So that's usually my recommendation, is kind of break open the web and just let nature run its course. There's no need to really spray much. Even if you did want to spray something, it's really hard to get it to the caterpillar because they're in their protective web. I mean, that's really.
I've even just kind of pruned off that, because usually it's at the end of a branch.
Yeah.
I've even just kind of pruned off that and then just taken it away.
Yeah, that's a great way to fix the one that's right by your front door, right out your window where you always look at it. One of my neighbor's trees right across the road has it every year. I see as I pull out of the driveway, there's usually one somewhere in that hickory tree. And that's fine. I mean, it's just a sign of the coming fall.
It's fall, yeah.
The third pest that kind of coincides is the Zimmerman pine moth. And, it infects a lot of different pine species. I'd say like Scotch pine and Australian pine are probably the ones that we see it on the most here, that are both non-native and tend to get stressed out by other things, but it can be a bad pest of those. So you guys, one of the signs, I think we have a picture coming up here, is sap flowing at the branch node. So you'll see these clumps of sap, and man, I would just almost bet money you could walk up to an Austrian pine and see this on a lot of them that are having issues. So right now is just a vulnerable time in their life stage. There's larvae that are crawling around on the bark and feeding on, a lot of times on branch tips or buds, or right underneath the bark is where they're feeding. So if we spray right now with a pesticide, it's a vulnerable point in their life stage, and that's what Goldenrod kind of helps us line up with, is when those larvae are vulnerable. Cool. Interestingly, there's also another spray window in the spring, and that's at the same time as saucer magnolia blooms. So that's, in Champaign County around April or so, that saucer magnolia starts to bloom. And same thing, they're in a larval stage, they're susceptible and vulnerable, and you can spray then. It's probably a common problem in Christmas tree farms, I guess, is another place where you get a lot of complaints from it, or a real need to scout and control. So, for Christmas tree farmers, when goldenrod blooms in the ditches, that's the time that you start scouting. Make sure you don't have a new infestation. So, those are just kind of some interesting ways to use other plants to remember or coincide a control treatment or something with another plant. So
that's pretty good. That's a good trigger. Like, I see my Solidago, my goldenrod blooming. Time to start thinking about these other pests that might be popping up. That's good.
I know you're holding up your Solidago, but and it just goes back to like right now. One of the things, and I know you guys talked about this in the last episode, is I'm getting all these bagworms. And by the time you really see them, it's too late to control them. The bags, once they're 3/4 of an inch, it is, you can't really do much other than pick the bags off. So all we can say as horticulturists at this time is look for them when the Japanese tree lilac is blooming, and that is the time that's when you can actually control. When you can actually spray and control bagworms. Right now, you could, but you're not getting much.
Because they're in their bag, so
they're too well protected.
You're not going to cover them. Yeah, exactly.
You can pick them off.
Very cool.
It's labor intensive.
You can hand pick if you've got a smaller planting.
If you really have to do something right now.
I always say pay a penny. I mean, I know kids don't go for pennies these days.
Maybe
pay them a dime a bag.
You never know. Know. Cool. Well, while we're talking about Solidago, before we get to our questions, I did want to bring that up because I know we're going to be getting questions here soon too about allergies, and a lot of people blame Solidago for fall allergies, but I want to point out that it's not the Solidago. Solidago has very heavy, sticky pollen, which bees use. It's the ragweed that's causing people's allergies, which most people don't notice. They see all the Solidago blooming and they blame that. But it's not.
Well, and really, it is just a prolific species.
It
across
is. It's everywhere. So people assume that
in every county it grows in weedy ditches and things. It's actually a problem in prairie restorations. And
I bet. Yeah.
That's what I was out with the Master Naturalist doing on Wednesday. Is we were working in Meadowbrook Park to just clip the goldenrod before it goes to seed and to kind of knock it back and let a little more light to other plants around it. Sure. And that's a way that without having to spray or do anything intensive, you can kind of go in and start to sway the species composition in a prairie. So
let other things take over.
So it's actually a native plant and great for pollinators. It is, but a bad guy when you're looking for diversity in a prairie restoration. It can take over if you don't do something.
That's a good point. Yeah, and in the landscape, most of the time you're not going to put Solidago in a landscape planting a lot of times unless you're getting a dwarf or like a sterile cultivar. So like this one is a dwarf Solidago. So it's only going to get, I think, maybe 18 inches high maximum. So that's a much smaller than your native Solidago species.
Yeah,
so much better in a landscape setting.
Certainly. Yeah, where, Canada goldenrod that I was clipping this week was almost up to my head.
Yeah, it's going to get much bigger.
It's a big, tall plant.
Awesome. I grow native.
Do you? Of course you do.
Awesome. I don't want it to be sterile.
I know. Okay, so we've got some questions coming in. That's great. Keep them coming. We've got a question from Lois. Are cannas affected by walnut trees? She said, despite my warnings, my neighbors planted several walnut trees a few years ago, and they've really grown. He's lost 2 apple trees, 2 forsythia bushes in his hedge, and his hedge is very stunted, and they're all very close to the walnut. The cannas I planted this year are somewhat near one of his trees, and they're stunted. I guess I thought they were far enough away to not be affected. Off the top of your head?
I've been really surprised at, the variability in what's susceptible to walnut and the proximity it needs to be in. I've seen plants that are really close or right under a walnut that show no signs. The same plant that is 50 yards away and shows signs. I'll give an example of a couple years ago, we planted some apple trees for my father-in-law for his birthday, I think it was. And those trees, and I know he is a good waterer. He's one of those people that likes to maintain his landscape. I know he watered them and took care of them. We mulched them. I helped plant the planting. Everything was done right, and those trees just withered away and died over the course of the next growing season. The only thing I can really attribute that to is a walnut tree that was like 50 yards away. Yeah. So It's just really variable, and I don't know off the top of my head the list of susceptible plants,
Yeah,
but
I don't either.
certainly things like tomato plants, like a
The
lot of our
stolanaceous are for sure very susceptible.
very
yeah.
susceptible. Cannas being tropical, I would guess there's not a similar walnut type of species that has that allelopathic chemical, so it releases a chemical from its roots that inhibit growth of other trees and plants. So yeah, it very well could be. You also need to think about the size of the walnut tree and the size of the root system. I mean, it's safe to say a root system of a mature tree could be up to 2 times the drip line of the tree, so it could go a ways, but so I don't have a great answer for that. I've just seen it really variable.
And we'll have to see, Lois, I think maybe after the show we'll have to see if we can find a link for you, because there are a couple of good extension lists out there of what is susceptible to walnut, because I don't know either if canna is one of them, but it's possible.
There's been a lot of research into that particular chemical compound and what's susceptible to it, and how to use it for good for us humans. So we great question. We may have to get you a little more info on that. Get back to you on that. Awesome. Okay. Go ahead. But I definitely would say it's possible if they're in close enough proximity.
Too, certainly.
And especially when you see something like that's across different species. You're listing for me like a number of different species that have had similar impacts.
Symptoms. Yeah.
Boy, that really would lead me to think it is. But we can maybe get a list
research
posted or check out a list that you could find somewhere.
Yeah. If you even just
source.
Google plants susceptible to walnut trees and just add extension to your search, that'll get you some good ones.
Because then your search results will be from universities and not
source,
from just somebody's garden blog that maybe doesn't have research to
back
the answer.
Exactly. Yeah. A question here from back when we were talking about pines. We were talking about Zimmerman pine moth. A comment here that a lot of pines are dying. Do we know why? Any particular reason for pines in general?
There's not one particular pathogen. I mean, I'd say if you're seeing pines dying this time of year, I mean, this is our hot, dry point, so it's like the ultimate stress point that kind of throws it over the edge. I guess there are probably a lot of our non-native species that you're seeing having issues. So, if you just look at Austrian pine, I mean, there's a long list of things that cause issues with it once they reach maturity. When they're younger, it seems like they're more vigorous and they don't have these issues, and then it really stinks because as they get to be a nice big tree, then they start to, just like we get old and we're more susceptible to things, they start to get more susceptible.
Start to go down,
And it can start off, stress. The tree goes through stress, and then that's when insects and diseases really come in and start attacking them. So, I can think of a list of stuff that will attack pines.
Yeah, certainly.
Everybody asks me about pines dying, and I don't know one specific thing.
Yeah, I think it's a multitude of factors. I think it's our climate. I think it's pest disease problems. I think it's, and like you said, stress. I mean, we had that large drought in 2012. It's been 7 years now, but I think we're still seeing a lot of effects of that drought season because of the stress that was brought on all of those trees.
Yeah,
so
it's hard to recover from that.
It is, yeah.
And trees take longer to show some of these symptoms. A tree goes through really bad drought, stressed, and it's not going to show you immediately the symptoms. It might show you the following year or 2 years from now.
Yeah, that's true. It takes time, Great question. We've got a question from Laura. Burdock is overwhelming her yard near the creek. What's the best way to control burdock?
Yeah, man. Well, I had some of it.
Can you eat the foliage of burdock?
Yeah, I think you can. Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but
Yeah,
do a little more research.
I don't know either. I've tried to control it as a weed. I mean, I had some pretty good luck with just clipping it to the ground and covering it with. It was actually landscape fabric that I just took a piece of because I had a really bad patch kind of along the fence of my garden that I just had, for one reason or another, it had been let go last year and got kind of going strong there. So that worked to, let it get big and full and then clip all that foliage off. And I put down some landscape fabric and a little bit of mulch over it because I kind of turned that area into a path.
Sure.
And it hasn't come back. So that's maybe...
So smothering it's one option. So.
Yeah, and I hadn't added the mulch till recently here to that area. So I just was making sure it was dead before I went ahead and made a mess of mulch and a weed there. I put that black... it was just landscape fabric, not necessarily plastic. But, I mean, I would guess, a lot of just non-selective herbicides would probably control it well. In my experience, it kind of has a long taproot.
I would say, how about hand pulling?
Yeah, I tried that first. I tried to pull those out, and I just broke the root. So I don't think you can really hand pull. You may be able to dig it out, but that's, again, kind of labor intensive. So
so a couple of strategies: either smother it, maybe do herbicide depending on the location and kind of where it's at, and maybe hand pull if you can get a good amount of the root.
Well,
or dig, yeah. If it's just rain and the soil's looser, then you might be able to get.
Another option is I have just used a string trimmer to repeatedly cut it back, and just over repeated cuttings, you deplete the energy in that root, and other things come in, then you're kind of selecting for a grass or something around it. But so that's another way. You can just remove its energy reserve by letting it leaf out multiple times and cutting it back. So
worth
that's
a shot.
Maybe a more organic method too.
Yeah, worth a shot, Laura. Okay, great. We've got a question from Paul. He's saying, as the climate warms, what yard and garden pests and diseases that are prevalent in the south of Illinois should we be keeping an eye out for in coming seasons? What do you think? Anything that's more prevalent in the south that we think might start to move its way north?
I think it was on this show we talked about the fact that laurel blight has recently moved a little further north.
Yeah, you mentioned that, I think, in the last show or the show before that, yeah.
So that's maybe one that I don't think people thought it was going to move as far north as it did. It's been a problem in the south for a long time. That doesn't impact a ton of different species. It's just sassafras or spicebush are susceptible. But that's one that, could be moving north. I think maybe there's probably a whole list of invasive plants.
That's what I was thinking.
That are going to have a better
and
climate.
Things that are going to move, like kudzu, for example, keeps kind of going farther and further north.
Yeah, Southern Illinois is kind of the cusp of the kudzu belt in the eastern U.S., and it may be creeping north. There's actually a pretty good program in Illinois for eradication through the state, and in the last few years I haven't had a connection to that, but in the past, the state has been pretty aggressive with some funding to get that under control when new patches are found to kind of keep it out of Illinois.
That's good.
So,
that's good. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the whole list of invasives.
I think I agree. I think as it warms, it is the invasive insect pests that we really need to worry about, whether it be, I'm trying to think of what is in the south that's not in the north. I don't know.
I can't think of any either. But I think
walnut.
Oh, thousand canker disease, or
the walnut twig beetle.
Oh yeah. That spreads thousand cankers.
Maybe Japanese beetles will be more successful.
It's possible that things might more easily overwinter if we end up having like more mild winters and things like that. That would be a big insect thing to think about. Yeah. So a lot of it's to be seen, and just keep in mind that the state and many of the agencies in the state are looking at these things. They're thinking about them so that we can be alerted when stuff like this happens.
A more immediate effect we're going to see is, or we're already seeing, is increased rainfall. That's a really strong trend. And you can see it in just flood stage of river data from rivers or annual rainfall data. We're already seeing that effect. And so, that's why I was kind of thinking about plants and on a bigger scale, like agricultural weeds, with a better amount of rainfall in our state, there's different weeds that would gain an edge. So, big picture, that's probably the biggest impact. In our backyard gardens, I don't know that we're going to have a giant shift in weed population. We may not have to water quite as much, which could be good.
True. But we also might have more extremes, too.
More extremes, definitely. That's part of it, too. Yeah. And, I think a big problem is going to be conveying all that stormwater out of our urban landscapes. We already have a lot of places that have a lot of issues when we get heavy rains, and when we get just an overall increase in annual rainfall, when we get more violent storms, larger amounts of rain at one time, a lot of our drainage infrastructure is going to have major problems, which is a great time for us as gardeners to start to do more rain gardens, because that's a goal of a rain garden, is to kind of attenuate that pulse of storm water that goes into all the system, to kind of hold it back a little bit before it gets to the storm drain. So great time to use rain gardens, or start to apply those.
Definitely.
Yeah, you know what rain sometimes means to me? It means I don't have to water my garden, which I'm usually happy.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I'm like, oh, mosquitoes.
Yeah.
It all has a positive
I
and a
need
negative,
to
right?
dump everything out.
Great question, Paul. Definitely a bigger conversation for sure, and something we'll keep an eye on. Okay, another question here. It said, I'm new to gardening in Illinois. Every season, our flower beds go from nothing to a 6-foot odd nightmare filled with very aggressive and fast-growing plants like Tree of Heaven. These plants are unwelcome, and every year I strip them out several times, but grow back exceedingly fast. What's the best way to remove these plants so I can start adding my own? You got a 6-foot bed of very aggressive things, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, Tree of Heaven's pretty difficult when it gets a patch going.
Would you do the landscape cloth or the black or the smothering at this point in the fall?
No, I don't think I would do it right now. There's just not enough of the growing season to really get things cooked. I mean, have you tried it in the fall?
No, I've just heard about solar sterilization, where they do the clear plastic over the plants, and it cooks the soil and cooks the weed seeds and cooks the plants underneath. But I agree.
And that works earlier in the season.
Sometimes I don't think that we have enough sun throughout the winter.
I think you could do a black plastic, though, or a black landscape fabric. And I don't think putting it now, you'd probably have to still leave it through some of the season next year. But that would certainly do some, and at least smothering, not allowing the sunlight to get to a lot of those. That could do something now.
Yeah. I mean, it's not helping the plants out to do it now. I think the way I've traditionally done it is had a game plan ready for spring. And before things came up in the spring, I had chopped everything back and put down the plastic, and then, it's maybe by this time of the summer, then you can peel it up and think you've got pretty good control or sterilization.
So it's potential. They might just need to take a season off, leave it covered, really let it.
Now, in the case of Tree of Heaven and some of these woody invasives, I mean, that's a place where I do use a chemical. I'm a pretty organic person otherwise, but just the most effective treatment for any of those woody invasive plants is a cut stump treatment, where you cut off the plant near the ground line and you treat that stump with a herbicide. And, it's systemic. It goes into the roots and it kills the plant. Tree of Heaven has a lot of little sprouts that come up, so you're going to have to stay after that. But the idea would be, if you get enough of those cut stumps treated with that systemic chemical, it's going to go down into all the roots and take care of them.
Yeah, that would be my strategy too, because it sounds like they've already tried kind of cutting things back or stripping them out. But unless something's done to take care of that whole root system, they're just going to keep.
I mean, another key to it all is, like, when are things setting seed? When are you... where's your seed source around you? If it's a giant Tree of Heaven in your neighbor's yard that's sent its whole root system in your yard, you may never get rid of it. If it's, things like Goldenrod that are getting ready to set seed in a few weeks, and you let that happen, then you've added to your seed bank. So
set yourself up for next year.
Yeah, so understanding identifying all those plants that are the problems, and then understanding how they're getting there, I think is the biggest key in just disrupting that cycle.
Yeah.
So
I too deal with Tree of Heaven, and it is in my neighbor's yard. They don't really manage. So I'm constantly just cutting Tree of Heaven sprouts from around my fence row. But my biggest issue with invasive plants is fall blooming clematis. I feel like I'm constantly pulling it out.
Does your neighbor have it, or
yes, it's everywhere.
Well, I know, but not everybody
everywhere.
has it. Mine actually died over the winter, so I do not have that problem.
Nice. Well, you can come get some of ours if you wanted. But yeah, it just seems like every time I turn around, I'm pulling sweet autumn clematis. So I don't use herbicides in my backyard. So I'm the cut, pull. Eventually I'm going to, deplete its resources enough, it's going to die.
Keep at it. Yeah. Great question. We got a question from Carol. A state park near her home has a naturalized prairie area, and she'd love to do that at home as well. Any good resources on how to get started, what to plant, how to care for a naturalized area? So recreating a prairie area.
Well, our Pollinator Pockets program
That's
has designs.
It's a good place to start.
And it's maybe some of those designs are for the size of this table, but there's larger designs. The U of I Pollinatarium has there's some larger designs on our website there. So yeah, I would Google the Illinois Extension Pollinator Pockets program. That's a great resource. It just depends on the size of your area, because there's this weird mix you get to where you're bigger than a pollinator pocket, you're smaller than a full scale landscape level prairie restoration, and there's some trickiness to managing that. So, probably with the pollinator pockets type design that I'm referring you to, probably the establishment method would be plugs or potted plants, things that you're going to kind of plant in there. If you have a bigger area, if it's, say, a half acre, you're probably going to be better off starting from direct seed on the soil surface. So, so it really kind of depends on the size of the location. If it's smaller, like a pollinator pocket, there's some great plans there. As far as a larger area that you might start with, I've seen some people be really successful in just collecting their own seed, starting a little patch, and just each year maybe a 10-foot wide strip by whatever length you want to go. And you can collect, eventually you build up your own seed source, you can collect and start to spread it. So that's the super cheap way to do it. But another thing we were doing with the Master Naturalists on Wednesday was collecting seed from some of the plants that are ready. Now you can't do that at a state park, or, Urbana Park District has a program where you can go collect seed with them, and you get to keep half and they keep half. So there's programs like that out there. Sometimes you can find somebody that has private land where they don't mind you collecting seed, but one of the things that I've always followed when you collect seed is to leave half and take half. You don't ever want to take all the seed out of a prairie restoration, because then there's nothing for its natural processes. And in the case of on Wednesday, we're collecting one of the native sunflowers that actually are a good-sized seed, and if you looked at that a few months from now, birds would have eaten a lot of those seeds. So it's a food source too. So there's different caveats to what size and how you want to do it, but by far the cheapest way is establishment from seed.
And of course the big thing too is going to be to make sure to manage the invasives, the things that you're not wanting to kill off, to start with a fresh slate so that you're not competing.
Okay. Start off with the pollinator pocket. Learn how to
small.
Manage that. Then start thinking about expanding, because otherwise you're going to have this weedy mess that you really don't know how to manage. I would definitely start small. And I would be on the lookout for a native plant cell where you can go and get some of those, maybe even 2-inch or 4-inch perennials. But I would not, if you did not have a prairie background or
someone who's going to help you manage it
I
for
would
you.
not, as one person, take on a large area right off the bat. I'd do a little at a time if I were you.
That's a great point. I mean, I've helped a lot of people that have that 2-year-old really weedy patch, and you get to where you have maybe 30% prairie plants and 70% weeds, and it's like, it's just a really difficult thing to deal with. So that's a really great point, that size is an issue. On our Pollinator Pockets website, we do have a list of plant sales that we know of. Now, there may be others out there, but that's a resource to you too there, where you can maybe find a place to source some of these materials.
Very good.
So
very good. Well, good luck, Carol. Good question. Start small, like we're saying, and then see how it goes. Okay, keep these awesome questions coming. We've got a question from Carolina here. We just took down a diseased blue spruce, Cytospora canker, she says is the cause. And they have a big pile of mulch. Can we compost or spread the mulch without risk to other plants that aren't spruce? Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
you
would
can
be
use the
my
mulch.
quick answer.
You know, it's there's some discussion about the level of acidity that pine needles tend to add to things. In my experience, I haven't really found it to be very significant.
No.
So you may read things about that. I usually don't really pay too much attention to
Our
it.
water is so basic at
That
times.
it kind of counteracts.
Yeah.
Some of the problem I've had with mulch from a conifer is that a lot of that material is needles, and it just is kind of dense, and it doesn't act like wood chips would. So that's sometimes a problem. I'll get a
break down kind of differently. Than
it
bark
kind of
mulch.
it just has a lot of rapid breakdown and things going on where you wind up with this lumpy like surface of mulch. You know, to some degree, when you have like all that fresh foliage in there, like pine needles in this case, or with deciduous trees, if you do mulch around really sensitive plants, all that biological activity can hurt them sometimes.
That's true.
So,
and it can pull some nitrogen from your soil while it's
but in general, if it's a woody plant you're mulching around, I don't worry about it. If you're going to go mulch around your tomato plant, something sensitive, you may want to keep the mulch back away from the plant a little bit, but for the most part, that mulch is pretty well ready to go.
Yeah.
In the ideal setting, you might let it compost for a little bit to let all that biological activity kind of take its spin. But
so if you're able to and you have the space to let it compost a little bit, then go for it.
But if you're just going to go mulch other trees, and when we mulch a tree, we don't ever put it up next to the trunk anyway, you're fine to go ahead and mulch away with it.
Yeah, and obviously the Cytospora canker that was on the spruce is not going to infect other tree species. So
and it's really not going to carry through the mulch.
Exactly,
I mean, it's been chopped up, and when that mulch lays in a pile, I mean, you've probably all seen when you take a scoop of mulch in the wintertime and steam comes off.
Yep.
There's heat in there. There's very, very few pathogens that ever make it through the mulching process, so to speak.
So you're good. Go ahead and use it. Great question. We've got a question from David. Why are we seeing so many problems with oaks? Tubackia and oak wilt are at high levels this year. You guys noticing any higher oak problems?
Yeah, I haven't seen oak wilt this year. I don't have an explanation for that. For an increase in oak problems. One trend I've seen around Central Illinois that I don't know that we have an explanation for is just this older generation of a couple 100-year-old oak trees kind of dying together in areas around the countryside. I don't know that. I mean, I don't really think it's exactly just old age hitting at once for all these. It's just weird how rapidly I've seen them decline. And I have a couple in my yard that I've had to cut down that I think are victims of this kind of shorter decline. Decline is that slow spiral to death that a tree experiences. So I don't know. I don't have an explanation for increased oak diseases this year.
Yeah, and I haven't heard any reports from the plant clinic or anything about really high numbers or anything, but.
No, bacterial scorch on red oaks is one that's I've probably seen more of in the last 10 years than we used to, and I don't know that there's, I don't know if it's climate that's interacting with that. I mean, there's probably just too many variables for us to really pin it to.
Yeah, and we've mentioned stress. I mean, there's been a lot of stress on trees in recent years, and that certainly opens them up to.
But oak wilt is definitely one to be aware of, and report if you think you see it or have it. It can spread readily. That's one of the reasons why we don't really want to prune an oak tree in the summertime, because it draws in the insects that bring that disease to other oaks. So save your pruning of oak trees till the wintertime, and you can avoid being a potential target, so to speak.
Very good. So we don't have a solid question for you, David, but keep an eye out. Yeah. Okay, question here from Lois. Is butterfly bush, Buddleia, really invasive? I keep reading that it is, but mine have never set seed. Kelly, I'm sure you have an opinion on this. I'm waiting for a Kelly question.
You guys better ask an insect question before I get up and leave.
I'm sure you have an opinion.
This is all Ryan today.
I'm sure you have an opinion on this, though. So let's hear it. Butterfly bush.
Well, butterfly bush is not yet considered an invasive in Illinois. It's considered an invasive on the West Coast. What the studies are that are coming out is that it is actually It is somewhat invasive there, and it is taking over some of the natural areas. But what it's doing is it's taking butterflies away from pollination services needed by the other native plants. So those plants need the butterflies to come get them, like the asters and the solidagos. I don't really know what grows on the West Coast. I'm sure they're beautiful.
Similar
Lots
thing,
of plants.
But so that's the scientific papers that are coming out of the West Coast. I do know that it is considered a species of concern in Illinois, and just because you don't personally see the spread does not mean it's not spreading. Because everybody will say, I plant burning bush or I plant barberry and it doesn't spread in my yard. Well, birds are spreading those to the natural areas. You mow, so it's probably why it's not spreading so fast in your yard. I really don't know exactly how seed is transmitted around from butterfly bush, but
Well, in the
that
case,
is not the greatest indication on if this plant is an invasive species.
Sure.
in the case of burning bush, I don't have a single burning bush in my landscape, but I have it in my woodlands. And so it's not from my yard. I don't
the
really
birds
even.
are dropping it in. Yeah.
I can't think of where the closest one is in people's yards where I can see it around my house. I kind of live in a rural area where homes are spread out. So, yeah, it's not always immediately by the source where we see the spread happening.
Yeah. So, Lois, it's not really invasive as we would say, but it is on the list of concerns. So, it's kind of up to you at this point, and if you feel comfortable have it in your garden or not.
Hey, Candice, what would you plant instead of butterfly bush?
I would plant a lot of other flowering shrubs, to be honest. So I would do something that's going to be something for multiple seasons. So like I would do maybe a lilac to get me that spring flower. I would do a couple different kinds of hydrangea to get me that summer, fall flower. Some of the viburnums. To me, butterfly bush is, it's nice, but most of the time for me it gets killed back to the ground anyways. So it doesn't end up being a kind of a nice flowering shrub like you kind of want it to be.
Yeah, but hydrangea doesn't help the butterflies.
Well, that's fine. That's not my goal. That's your goal. I tend to like cut flowers, as we all know.
I love this plant.
This would be one of Kelly's favorites here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
You're good.
This plant is covered in
is.
in insects during the fall.
Yeah, and you can see it does have those nice kind of bright blue flowers like a butterfly would. This is Caryopteris, or bluebeard is a common name for it. It's usually covered with bees and other pollinators. Mine died out this past winter, which I was really bummed about. So I'm going to put a new one in.
St. John's wort is a native that I like.
That's true. That would be a good one too.
Flowers for a big chunk of summer. I don't know that there's a lot of winter interest. But
that would be a good one too.
But yeah, flowers for a big section of summer.
Yeah, there's
doesn't
definitely
get too
alternatives. Definitely alternatives.
Yeah.
And I would
Good
even
question.
plant goldenrod or liatris or cone flowers or asters before I would plant butterfly bush.
I think most people see the name butterfly bush and they think, oh, this has got to be great for butterflies. I'm going to plant it. But in reality, there's so much more that could.
Well, but honestly, it does have a lot of butterflies on it.
It does. They do enjoy it. So
But,
it's kind of that
a
like
lot of alternatives out there, though.
Definitely. Great question. We got a question from Janice. She has an area near her house that gets part sun. It's on the side of her house that we don't really spend much time on, but it's on the side of the 3-season room with windows. She's thinking about planting a native grass along that side of the house. Is there a native grass you might suggest that would be interesting, and where can I purchase seed or plants?
One of the shorter ones I like a lot is prairie drop seed.
That's what I was going to say, too.
It's a little difficult to kind of get into that patch, but it also makes it kind of easy to keep in little clumps.
Yeah, it's a clumping grass. It's not going to spread, which is good. And it's going to be relatively short. So if you do have windows, then I think prairie drop seed would be good because it's not going to grow and kind of cover the windows.
Yeah, I kind of like it for the edge of a bed. Like I think I'm going to put it in along our sidewalk as kind of the border along the sidewalk, and the foliage gets about this tall, and then the seed head kind of is wispy
and it's airy, so you can.
Another great one is little blue stem that has actually pretty good fall color.
Yep.
You can get some really great color.
So she said part sun.
Oh, part sun. Oh.
Would these two?
I think they would both
do well and
grow fine. You may not have as much seed head production. I think on either of them.
Fall color.
Or maybe fall color.
Probably not as good on fall color. Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear the sun part.
Good point. I didn't mention that either. The other one you could do, I mean, it's a little more aggressive, but like northern sea oats takes some shade.
Yeah, it does take shade.
Though I don't know that that's native.
It's native.
Is it native? Yeah. Okay, it is native. That would be an option. That would take more of the shade. It's going to fill in an area over time because that's kind of just what it does. It definitely is.
But that's kind of a nice thing about it sometimes too, is it's going to fill in and aggressively choke out weeds. It doesn't. It's got a little bit of fall color maybe, but it has a super interesting seed on it, and you can see it right now. In a lot of prairie restorations and places you can see it. But really interesting little seed head on it that hangs around through the winter and persists till spring.
Yeah, so Janice, I would maybe try the prairie drop seed or the little blue stem if you think it gets enough sun in certain parts of the day. Or the northern sea oats, I think, might be.
And, if it gets half a day of sun, I think those other two would... I mean, if it gets a good...
Fine. Yeah. They may not fill in quite as much as they would in a full sun location.
But. Here's a really good, tip on sun. Okay, if you are getting afternoon sun, then you can plant some things, sun perennials you can plant. Yeah. If you're getting morning sun and you're getting afternoon shade, then you need to go more towards shade perennials or things that can take more shade. Yeah. So when you say part sun, to us that means afternoon sun, which would mean you could use some of the suggestions that Ryan said, but I have a feeling I think you're meaning that you're not getting afternoon sun, but you're getting morning sun, which you should use the what was it? The northern sea oats.
Yeah, man, the amount of sun is just a puzzling thing too. And it surprises me at how many times I've miscalculated the amount of sun.
Oh, I've done that all the time too. Like, better move this. It's not quite in the right.
So I mean, there's been times where there's spots in my yard. I've taken a picture at multiple times throughout the day on Saturday when I was out doing yard work, just to kind of get some type of data, as opposed to I just feel like it's. I mean, I guess if you do have morning or afternoon sun, but as far as like hours of sunlight and what plants fit into that, that's when I would, asking that question, sometimes I actually do try and visit it multiple times in the same day to see what you got.
Yeah. Good tip. Great question, Janice. Question here from Holly. What are the plants it is keeping butterflies from? Back to our butterfly bush question. What are the plants it's keeping butterflies from paying more visits to? Do you know if it's...
Well, I'm not very familiar with West Coast type of plants, so I can't, I've just read a couple of scientific studies that have come from those universities talking about, how it takes butterflies away from pollinating native plants. So I can't answer that question for you.
I mean, it's native plants that they're discussing in these studies.
So we don't have that research yet in Illinois, but someday we might have
But, I mean, it's well established for other examples in Illinois, and not necessarily with insects, but with other invasive species that come in and disrupt the population of fauna or wildlife. There's really good studies on bush honeysuckle and how it changes bird populations. Because in the past we used to say, like, birds really love bush honeysuckle. It has all these berries on it that are bird food, which is ironically how it spreads. But there's studies that show bird diversity really goes down in forested stands that have a lot of bush honeysuckle. So just kind of as an ecological principle, that's, you can kind of understand it a little bit that way, that, those butterfly bush, they're just attracting more pollinators than we could have just all over the native plants around there. So, and kind of changing the habits of insects.
And that's what an invasive plant species does. It outcompetes everything around it. And so again,
Yeah.
the bush honeysuckle outcompeting all the native plants. The birds prefer it, but in turn, not good for them.
Very true. Okay, Holly has a couple other questions. We've got about 5 minutes left here, so if you have a burning question, get it in now. Holly's asking, is giant reed grass or peppermint stick perennial in rural LaSalle County? I'm trying to think of the species for giant reed grass.
I'm thinking of Phragmites is what I would call
I have
reed
never
grass.
heard the word peppermint stick.
I haven't either. I've never heard of that common name. So, Holly, if you can get us the species name, that would help us narrow it down. 'Cause giant reed grass to me could be a couple of different things.
Well, I mean, I guess we can probably answer that there's not really a native plant that fits into that category of a giant reed grass. I mean, there's a lot of miscanthus species that are ornamental grasses that are not native. Phragmites is one that you see just, I mean, even along the ditches of the interstate, in areas that are disturbed.
Yep.
Sometimes in areas that are disturbed by flooding, or water. None of those are really native.
So we're not sure, Holly. We need to figure out what species it is, and then we can determine that for sure. She's also asking about cosmos. Will cosmos have time to bloom if I sow seeds now? No, they would not. What are the flowers, shrubs that compare to planting a fall veggie garden like lettuce, kale, broccoli, cabbage?
It's kind of a good question.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
So cosmos, no, would not bloom fast enough if you started from seed. And honestly, I think in terms of an annual flower, that if you planted it from seed now and you wanted to bloom for the fall, pansies,
Borage.
yeah, maybe some of the flowering herbs you could get.
You could plant snapdragon transplants.
Yeah, from seed, I think you're too late for most things, Holly. But if you could get transplants, small plants of snapdragons, pansies.
Now, if
Any
she's
of the
further
cool
south, there may be more options.
Would marigold? Because
they would
marigolds
germinate pretty
are
quick.
touted as a cool weather annual at times.
yeah.
Like, how fast would it take for them to germinate? But I would just personally, marigolds, pansies, they're not that expensive as transplants.
Yeah,
I would go for the transplants and skip the seeding.
Yeah, you're probably better off to head to the garden center, get some 6-packs of a couple of cool season annuals, and I think that would be a good complement to your veggie garden at this point.
But it's kind of a neat idea, though. Like, I plant a fall vegetable garden, but I never plant a fall flower garden.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah. That's,
a lot of us don't think about it.
I used to sell fall annuals in the greenhouse.
Okay, we're down to the last 2 minutes. So we have one question left here from Kathy. So let's see if we can get it answered. Kathy says their landscaping is about 50 years old. They have many yew bushes around the house. Over the last several years, several have become entirely brown and died. Do bushes have a lifespan? What would you recommend replacing them with that are low maintenance?
they definitely have a lifespan.
They definitely have a lifespan.
Yeah. And if they've been sheared, if you've kind of sheared them, they just don't have much of a canopy when we shear them. They kind of become this shell around the outside of the plant of foliage, and so I think that kind of those are the ones I see kind of really start to die out in that pattern.
I think if you planted a yew just out in the middle of the open, it would probably live for 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have a long lifespan. But
And let it
a natural
grow
shape,
naturally.
A natural shape. But as a foundation planting, I mean, really, ideally, you should only expect that for like 5-10 years, I would say. If you're going to keep shearing it and keep maintaining it pretty
if you want it to look really nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a lot of mature landscapes that have been sheared forever, and it's just like this much foliage around the outside of the plant. So they can go on for a long time like that. I mean, maybe even 50 years like that, but you're not getting that beautiful, like, thick, lush plant that you would want.
So what's a low-maintenance replacement we could do for you?
So, I mean, in the category of evergreens, if that's kind of your goal, I think what I would maybe replace a yew with that's similar are some of the junipers that stay low. Because they don't, I don't have a variety in mind I could name for you, but there's some of them that have like a really grayish colored foliage I think looks neat, or you can get them that are just pretty green, but they stay relatively low, and you don't have to shear them to get them into that size. If anything,
natural.
you have to kind of keep them kept from creeping out low to the ground. So that's a possible replacement. In the world of like evergreen shrubs, there's not really a great native.
There really
that you
isn't.
can
And like
recommend.
boxwoods are popular, but that's I don't think is your way to go either, just because of all the winter damage lately with boxwood and disease problems.
Yeah, the boxwoods are kind of starting to get on the list of not.
So if it was me, if you didn't have to have something evergreen, I would switch it up and come in with some type of hydrangea or some type of flowering shrub that would give you a little more interest.
Can we say we love hydrangea?
Well, I mean, we talk about these all the time. We really do.
If
We
you
really
have
do.
watched us
We
more
should
than
be
once, you
salesmen
should
for
be planting hydrangea
We
in your
should.
garden
We
because
should.
this plant is amazing.
It is.
It doesn't attract butterflies.
It doesn't.
But it is
But it has
so
a lot of other good
pretty.
features.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
It's easy to take care of.
Something that's like semi-native but evergreen and broadleafed is rhododendrons.
That's
You
true.
know, I do like those.
Yeah, especially if you're on the north side of the house, you got a shady.
Yeah, they handle a lot of
formation.
shade.
Yeah, so couple options to try. Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. And Holly did a follow-up. She's talking about Arundo Donax, which did cross my mind, and I believe Arundo Donax is perennial, if my memory serves me right. Either of you remember?
I don't
Are you
know.
kidding? No.
Okay. I'm pretty sure it is, Holly. I can research for
Your
you. though.
zone 5B.
I'll research for you, though.
Arundo.
Arundo
Will
Donax.
it grow in Zone B?
Yeah.
Zone B.
Figure out what
B.
zone it is. If it's zone 5, you're good. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for all the questions today. You guys kept us going the whole time, which was awesome. And we got a couple we didn't even get to. So we will see you next time, and we'll address those questions and any new questions you have. But thank you everyone for joining us.
Bye.